A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to your nation's capital, to the Committee on Education and Workforce Subcommittee on Early Childhood, Elementary, and Secondary Education. I'm Aaron Bean. Welcome. We're glad to have you here. The subcommittee will come to order. I note a quorum is present. Without objection, the chair is authorized to call a recess at any time. If you want to find Aaron Bean at the mall or in the library, I'm going to give you a hint where I love to be. It's the self-help section of the books. I'm a junkie. I buy them all the time. I have a little mini library. What can I do to become more efficient, or how can I do, you name it, to do it better? So I'm always listening or reading. One of my favorites is Jim Rohn. I don't know if you know him, but it's like talking to a friend when I read what he says. His time management skills are something that I really pay attention to. He actually has said, time is our most valuable asset, yet we tend to waste it, kill it, spend it rather than invest it. And in no place is this more true than in our nation's classrooms. Our teachers have such limited time, 180 days to teach our kids, and they have such a limited window of learning. New research published early this year by NWEA Research shows that 4 years after the pandemic, 8th graders are still a full year behind in math and reading. In fact, the average U.S. student would need more than 4 months of school to catch up to pre-pandemic achievement levels. We've had a committee based solely on how far behind the United States truly is after the pandemic. But right now, out of 38 major countries, the U.S. sadly ranks 26, are you kidding me? 26 in math, 6 in reading, and 10th in science globally. We don't have any time to waste, and that should be a wake-up call to everybody. We've got work to do. So while the good news is we've turned to in-person instructions, it's clear that our kids are in trouble. Why? Rather than a curriculum that focuses on helping students bounce back from COVID setbacks, our children are taught race-inspired ideology. Today, we're here to discuss the dangers of an inherent in the curriculum being taught in American elementary and secondary schools. Chief among these dangers is that schools are substituting the traditional narrative of this great but flawed nation with political story built on racial resentment and collective guilt. The force is called critical race theory, or CRT. It's a neo-Marxist ideology that's crept into classrooms across America, and it's now reshaping how young people interpret their identity, and it's changing how they see themselves, each other, and our country. Now, you may hear people say, oh, this isn't happening. No, that's just a thing of the past. That can't possibly exist in American K through classrooms today. Well, we've got evidence that it does, and by taking these key elements and thrusting them on young, impressionable people, that is happening. Don't believe me, we've got an all-star panel representing these 50 states that'll come bring their testimony. CRT teaches that every interaction between people is a struggle between oppressors and victims. It tells children that race alone defines them. This ideology creates division where none needs to exist, breeding mistrust, resentment, and even hostility between young people who would otherwise share healthy friendships. Examples of CRT are abound in the classroom. Take, for example, California's Ethnic Studies Model Curriculum. The program is rolling out next year and will require students to evaluate how their race, gender, class, and sexual orientation involve oppression. Additionally, the CRT's framework is distorted and applies how further division foster animosity among the Jewish people. We've had numerous examples that fail to give the full context of Jewish history on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We've had a meeting about that as well, that anti-Semitism is alive and well in high schools across America. This isn't just about race or ethnicity. In Chicago, public schools have integrated gender ideology into their curriculum. Kindergartners now learn about anatomy, and by 5th grade, students are introduced to concepts like puberty blockers. Even more alarming, the U.S. Department of Education is quietly backing these approaches. In 2023, it tied diversity, equity, and inclusion priorities to the longstanding American history and civics grants programs. Parents see this as a clear signal. CRT is coming to the local schools. But I've got good news, America. There are alternatives out there. Some that we'll hear from today. The 1776 Unites, the Jack Miller Center, and the University of North Carolina School of Civic Life and Leadership are organizations and initiatives built to emphasize the importance of civics, understanding America's founding principles, and promoting a free exchange of ideas. Now, 10 or 20 years ago, we would just simply call this history. That's what we would call it. Now it's borderline rebellious to teach the importance of the American founding and the virtue of self-governance. The stakes could not be higher. Time is ticking. Remember Jim Rowe? We got math and science to teach. So why are we even wasting any time on crazy stuff? Woke curriculum seeks to reshape the very foundation of Western civilization by rejecting the values of individual liberty and responsibility that underpin our society. It's educational malpractice to teach a generation of children to feel ashamed of who they are or see themselves as victims without hope or change. We must fight for our kids and education. The future of our nation depend on it. That's why I'm looking forward to our hearing. We've got a great panel that we'll get to in just a few minutes. We'll have a great, robust discussion and questions. And so sit back and tune in. Thank you for America for watching as we have an important hearing on curriculum in America. I now yield to the ranking member for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Bean, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. And as we discuss the state of our K-12 education system, I want to emphasize that the federal government does not dictate curriculum, nor should we. This was once a non-controversial bipartisan value, and I find it interesting that many of my colleagues view school curriculum as a state and local issue only when schools are teaching topics in a way they agree with. The majority titled this hearing Back to Basics, America's Founding, Civics and Self-Government in K-12 Curricula. Yet they often advocate to block the teaching of facts and ideas set by state and local communities. Based on today's testimony, one thing my colleagues and I can agree on is the importance of civics education. Students should be critical thinkers and informed participants in our democracy. They should know and understand accurate and culturally relevant history. I strongly support the great work of organizations like the National Center for Civics Education, which runs excellent programs like Project Citizen, with the civics education program for middle, secondary, and post-secondary students, as well as youth and adult groups. In my home state of Oregon, high school teams participate in the center's We the People competition, organized in Oregon by our local nonprofit Civics Learning Project. And I assure you that the students who participate know more about the Constitution than most members of Congress. And although we appear to support civics education, states and school districts ultimately decide what to teach their students. That is how our national public school system has worked since America's founding. So instead of spending time interfering with state and local decision making, we should talk about issues that Congress does have the power to influence. We should talk about the unmet needs of students, particularly students with disabilities, students from low-income families, students of color, students who need counseling or behavioral health care, and youth experiencing homelessness or living in foster care. Today, committee Democrats will focus on one of those important issues, the infrastructure of our schools. Our committee should be finding ways to make real, tangible, and positive differences in the lives of students, teachers, and our communities. That's why we're here. School infrastructure is not just about walls and ceilings of school buildings. It's about the entire environment in which our children learn. And right now, far too many of these environments are unsafe, outdated, and desperately in need of repair. The average public school in America is more than 50 years old, and many have been crumbling for decades, long before the pandemic. Poor ventilation, broken heating and cooling systems, outdated plumbing, and lack of modern digital infrastructure, those are just a few of the issues that students and teachers face daily. These conditions are not only a distraction, they pose serious health and safety risks to the millions of children and educators who learn and work in these facilities. The need for investment in public schools is evident. That's why I want to emphasize the need for Congress to pass the Rebuild America's Schools Act, a crucial piece of legislation introduced by Ranking Member Scott and Representative Norcross. This bill represents a comprehensive investment in our schools' physical and digital infrastructure, focusing on those that face the most significant challenges, and that's especially true in high-poverty communities. And I didn't know we were going to talk about rankings today, so I didn't bring the statistics, but if you adjust for income and socioeconomic status, you're going to see very different results in school rankings. This investment is not just about repairing buildings. It's about investing in the health and safety of students and investing in our future as a nation. It's not just a moral imperative, it's an economic one. According to the Economic Policy Institute, each $1 billion spent on construction generates nearly 18,000 jobs. This means that the Rebuild America's Schools Act $130 billion investment would create more than 2 million jobs. When we invest in our schools, we're improving learning environments while also stimulating the economy by creating good-paying jobs across the country. And notably, nearly 54% of school districts report needing to replace or upgrade critical infrastructure in their school buildings. According to a 2020 GAO report, this neglect threatens students' health and academic success, and is especially important in low-income and rural areas where it's harder to raise local and state revenue. We can and must do better. There are many important issues we need to address in education, and the condition of our school buildings should not be an afterthought. It should be a top priority. Let's leave the curriculum to our local school boards and states. Children cannot learn in unsafe environments, and a teacher cannot effectively teach in a building that's falling apart. So I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today. I hope we can all agree on the urgency of this issue. Our children, teachers, and communities deserve schools that are safe, healthy, and conducive to learning. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Bonamici. Pursuant to Committee Rule 8-C, all committee members who wish to insert written statement to the record may do so by submitting them to the committee clerk electronically in Microsoft Word format by 5 p.m. after 14 days of the date of this hearing, which is December 18th, 2024. And without objection, the hearing record will remain open for 14 days after this date of this hearing to allow such statements and other extra material referenced during the hearing to be submitted for the official record. I know for the subcommittee that some of the colleagues, of our colleagues who are not permanent members of the subcommittee may be waving on for the purpose of today's hearing. And now I turn to the introduction of our distinguished witnesses making up our all-star panel. First up, Mr. Ian Rowe, who is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C., where he focuses on education and upward mobility. Mr. Rowe serves as senior visiting fellow at the Woodson Center and is a writer for the 1776 Unites campaign. Mr. Rowe has an MBA from Harvard Business School and a BS in Computer Science Engineering from Cornell University. Welcome, Mr. Ian. Our second witness is Dr. Ched Atkins, who is the director of the Dean of the School of Civic Life and Leadership at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Dr. Atkins came to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in March of 2024, early this year, to become the inaugural director and Dean of the School of Civic Life and Leadership. Previously, he was at Duke University, where he was a member of the faculty since 2009. There, he was director of Duke's Civil Discourse Project, which sponsored activities that promote and engage discourse with the goal of creating intellectually diverse communities, and was also the faculty director of the Transformative Ideas programs for sophomores, which includes an initiative on civic life and thought. Dr. Atkins earned his degree in political thought and intellectual history and a PhD in classics, both from the University of Cambridge, and his AB in government and classics from Bowdoin College. I yield to the ranking member for the introduction of our third witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Brian Kennedy is the Director of Legislative Affairs at the International Union of Bricklayers and Allied Craftworkers. As a member of the Build America's Schools Infrastructure Coalition, or BASIC, he advocates for the federal role in modernizing public school buildings and grounds nationwide. He previously served as General Counsel for the House Committee on Education and the Workforce, and held leadership roles at the U.S. Department of Labor, including National Deputy Director and Assistant Secretary. Mr. Kennedy earned his bachelor's degree from James Madison University and his JD from the University of Virginia School of Law.
Welcome, Mr. Kennedy. Glad to have you here. And our final witness is Michael Weiser. He's also a fellow Floridian from the free state of Florida. We are suffering in this cold weather here, but we'll get through it somehow, Mr. Weiser. He's the chair of the board of directors at the Jack Miller Center in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Mr. Weiser began his tenure as chair of the board of directors in March of earlier this year, and serves as general partner of Lowell Associates LP, a private investment partnership, and as chair emeritus of the National Conference on Citizenship, the board which he led from 2008 to 2016. Mr. Weiser received a Bachelor of Journalism degree from the University of Missouri. A native of Chicago, he resides in Miami with his wife and serves as chair of the History Miami Museum from 2016 to 2020. We thank you for being here today, all of our witnesses, and I've mentioned to everybody except Mr. Kennedy this 5-minute rule where everybody gets 5 minutes, including our witnesses. Make the most of it. If you stray, I'll give you a little tiny tap, but no need for that. We're going to have a robust discussion. So welcome, and with that, I am pleased to introduce and welcome Mr. Rowe for your testimony.
Good morning, Chairman Bean, Ranking Member Bonamici, and all of the committee members. Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify on America's founding, civics, and self-government in K-12 curricula. I join you today wearing 3 hats. First, as Chairman Bean mentioned, as a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, where I research education and upward mobility, and also lead something called the FREE Initiative, where I study the intersection of family, religion, education, and entrepreneurship. I'm also a senior visiting fellow at the Woodson Center, where I help develop free K-12 lesson plans, 1776 Unites, that have now been downloaded more than 200,000 times by teachers in all 50 states who want a more complete history of the African American experience in the United States. And finally, in my 3rd hat, for the last 15 years, I have led public charter schools, including now as CEO of Vertex Partnership Academies, a virtues-based international baccalaureate public charter high school that I founded in the Soundview section of the Bronx, New York. Now, the reason I run schools is that I want our students to know that they can do hard things. Even in the face of inevitable challenges, they can lead virtuous, self-determined lives with meaning and purpose in a country that is not hostile to their dreams. The guiding premise is that a self-governing, civil, and free society depends on a society populated by individuals who understand their history and who have the ability to self-govern their own behaviors that are both constrained and liberated by a set of common civic virtues. Towards this end, our high school Vertex is organized around the 4 cardinal virtues of courage, justice, temperance, and wisdom. These are called the cardinal virtues from the Latin root cardo, which means hinge, because they are the root virtues upon which all other standards of moral excellence depend. Our students also recite the preamble to the Constitution each day to remind them that we are the people to shape the future. In an environment that promotes school choice, efforts like what we're doing at Vertex, the Woodson Center 1776 Unites curriculum, and the 9th grade curriculum that we're now developing at AEI in partnership with Johns Hopkins to cultivate personal agency within students. These are all necessary given the infusion of divisive ideologies now appearing throughout our K-12 system, which posit this oppressor versus oppressed framework based on identity groups in every American law and institution. Unfortunately, examples abound, such as the discredited New York Times 1619 Project and the Pulitzer Center, who produce curriculum like reparations math that promote Black dependency, or spread other falsehoods that America was founded as a slavocracy and not a democracy, or that the founding principles were false when they were written, or that the country was founded in 1619 and not 1776. These are all falsehoods. Yet, Atlantic Magazine just published The Death of American Exceptionalism, which makes the case that young Americans no longer believe that their country is anything special. In the early 1980s, 67% of high school seniors agreed that, quote, despite its many faults, America's system of doing things is still the best in the world, end quote. 67% in the early 1980s, that number has now fallen to 27% in 2022. As a school leader, I believe we must encourage a certain reverence for the Constitution in today's students, especially given the document's remarkable endurance in helping our country navigate the arduous path of fixing past wrongs for nearly 250 years. The key is to be honest. Those who seek to teach a sanitized version of history to achieve some false sense of patriotic education do our country and students a disservice. And ironically, so do those who cherry pick the most egregiously cruel acts to weave together a narrative of a permanent American malignancy of racism or some other form of oppression. In order to achieve civic pride, we must have the confidence to tell the totality of American history in K-12 schools, warts and all. As a dividend, by telling the truth of the inspiration and the setbacks, the adversity and the triumph over adversity, we will also inspire a reverence for liberty and the American experiment. Thank you.
Well done, Mr. Rowe. Thank you so much. Up next is Dr. Atkins. You're welcome. You're recognized, my friend. Welcome.
Chairman Bean, Ranking Member Bonamici, distinguished members of the committee, my fellow citizens. Thank you for inviting me to speak to you on the topic of civic education and in particular about the School of Civic Life and Leadership at Chapel Hill, at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. The acronym for the school is SKILL, and that's how I'll be referring to it in my remarks this morning. I'll also wear two hats. One is as the school's inaugural director and dean, and second of all, as a scholar in Greek and Roman political philosophy, the history of civic thought and political thought, and contemporary discussions on civic education and civil discourse. America is facing grave challenges to our democratic life. The rate of polarization is increasing. Civic knowledge is lacking among our college students, the majority of whom lack elementary knowledge of our democratic institutions, such as the basic powers of our federal government or the purpose of the 13th Amendment. Public trust in our universities is rapidly declining. More Americans, 30%, now have very little or no confidence in higher education than have a great deal of confidence, 28%. As I describe in detail in my written testimony, the founders of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill established our nation's first public university in 1789 to provide the people of North Carolina with a civic-minded liberal education. Skill's mission for civic education renews the promise of UNC's founders, who advocated for the university on the premise that the young people of our state would benefit from an education that looked to their happiness and helped them understand their social duties in a pluralistic society. UNC's founders understood that the search for human meaning was linked to living productive lives in a democracy. Skill promotes this vision by fostering a free speech culture that enables students to explore their own worldviews and those of others in a spirit of curiosity and charity by considering the best of what has been thought and said about the perennial questions of human and civic flourishing. By coming to understand the shared institutions and civic values that unite us as citizens, and then by practicing the habits of speaking, working, and living with folks from very different backgrounds. Before the creation of Skill, there was no single department at UNC Chapel Hill devoted to providing the sort of civic education I just described. As you know, if there is an important job, but no one takes responsibility for it, then the work won't get done. Skill ensures that the serious work of educating citizens to live and thrive in our pluralistic democracy will get done. We are hiring the best faculty in the world committed to this mission. We hired 11 last spring and we'll be hiring more this year. Students are already taking classes and enrolled in our minor. Our courses were full this fall and enrollments are shaping up to be very strong for the spring. Our spring offerings will help our students understand the main ideas and institutions of the American civic tradition, explore the role of science in our public policy debates, and learn to talk in a spirit of friendship across our deepest divides. Our minor includes courses in civil discourse that fulfill a graduation requirement that all students must complete. Curricular and co-curricular opportunities will help students put into practice civil discourse and wise decision-making of leaders within the context of their chosen careers. Most of the real world is outside of the classroom, and Skill aims to set the table in numerous other venues for our campus community to explore issues in a spirit of friendship. My written testimony lists these in detail, so I'll just mention one now. We are partnering with Residential Life to provide a civil discourse residential community in which our students will be empowered to live, learn, and think productively across difference. As a flagship state university, UNC Chapel Hill also has the duty to enrich the civic life of the people of our state beyond our campus. Skill will be partnering with the school government to provide education and civil discourse for our freshman state legislators. A longer-term aspiration involves K-12 work, focusing on equipping our state's high school students and teachers with the capacity for civil discourse and knowledge of the American political tradition. Providing high school teachers with effective pedagogy and curricula will help them prepare their students for the responsibilities of democratic citizenship in a pluralistic society. Among college students, developing the capacities for leadership, civil discourse, and achieving deep civic knowledge is especially important for those who may become our future school teachers and who will educate the next generation of citizens who are the future of our democracy. Those are just some of the ways in which Skill will educate generations of thoughtful citizens who can speak, live, and work in our pluralistic democracy. Imagine the impact of such a civic education after 40 years. I am convinced that our students will change North Carolina, our country, and the world. Thank you.
Well done, Dr. Atkins. Thank you so much. Up next is Mr. Kennedy. You are recognized, my friend. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Bean, Ranking Member Bonamici, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the critical and urgent need for federal investment to modernize our nation's public schools. My name is Brian Kennedy, and I serve as Director of Legislative Affairs at the International Union of Bricklayers and Allied Craftworkers. I also serve as a board member of the Build America Schools Infrastructure Coalition, a diverse, nonpartisan coalition united in advocacy for a robust and reliable federal role in modernizing the nation's public school buildings and grounds. I speak to you today not only as an advocate for America's construction workforce, but as someone deeply committed to ensuring that every child in this country has the opportunity to learn and thrive in a safe, modern, and healthy school environment. A December 2023 survey of the United States Department of Education found that the average age of the main instructional building of our nation's public schools was 47 years. This means tens of thousands of our nearly 100,000 public schools were constructed during a wave of investment in the mid-20th century and have since fallen into disrepair. A 2020 GAO study found that an estimated 54% of schools need significant upgrades to their heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems, and also had other major systems like roofs, plumbing, and electrical needing to be upgraded or replaced. Additionally, many school buildings do not meet modern standards for resilience and will not hold up to extreme weather. Local communities are working hard to address these challenges. In fiscal year 2022, school districts spent nearly $80 billion in 2024 dollars. However, a conservative estimate for what is needed is $130 to $180 billion each year over the next 15 to 20 years to ensure responsible stewardship of this essential public good. This is not a red state issue or a blue state issue, it's a community issue. It's about ensuring that all children, regardless of their zip code, have access to safe and conducive learning environments. Without a local, state, and federal partnership to address the crisis, the problem will only worsen. The decrepit conditions of our school facilities have a profound effect on both health and academic outcomes. Poor indoor air quality caused by failing HVAC systems has been linked to higher rates of asthma and respiratory illness, leading to increased absenteeism among students and staff. Studies have shown that students in well-maintained modern buildings perform better academically with fewer disruptions and higher rates of teacher retention. We must ask ourselves, how can we expect our children to compete in a 21st century global economy when they are learning in 20th century or even 19th century buildings? Investing in school modernization is not only about improving education, it's about creating jobs and bolstering local economies. Federal funding to address school infrastructure would directly support the construction industry, creating millions of jobs for skilled construction workers. These are good-paying, middle-class jobs that help families build stable futures while addressing a critical national need. Moreover, modernizing schools strengthens communities. Public schools are often the heart of local neighborhoods, serving as polling places and community meeting spaces. A federal investment in school infrastructure is an investment in the social fabric of our communities. Historically, the federal government has played a limited role in funding school infrastructure, leaving states and local districts to bear the brunt of these costs. However, the scale of the crisis demands federal leadership. In today's dollars, it requires a minimum of another $50 billion of stable funding per year over the next 15 years to directly support facility improvements. That is why the BAC has endorsed the Rebuild America Schools Act, RASA, legislation sponsored by Ranking Member Bobby Scott and Representative Donald Norcross, that invests $130 billion in our nation's school infrastructure, improves students' academic performance, and creates more than 2 million jobs. And while we continue to support RASA, we are open to other creative approaches to addressing this critical issue. What we know for sure is that the status quo is not working. Today, I urge this committee to champion a bipartisan effort to provide robust federal funding for public school infrastructure. By doing so, we can ensure safe and healthy learning environments, create millions of jobs, strengthen communities, prepare for the future. As we gather here today, millions of students are sitting in classrooms with cracked ceilings, inadequate heating, and unsafe drinking water. Their teachers are doing their best under impossible conditions. Our children deserve better, and as a nation, we can and must do better. Modernizing America's public schools is not just an investment in infrastructure, it's an investment in our future. I urge the committee to take bold action and lead the way in providing the federal assistance our schools so desperately need. Thank you.
Mr. Kennedy, thank you very much. Well done. Brought it in for a landing very nicely. Let's go to our final witness, Mr. Weiser. You are recognized. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you very much. Chairman Bean, Ranking Member Bonamici, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear today to discuss the state of civic education in America. I am chair of the Jack Miller Center, a nonpartisan nationwide network of scholars dedicated to reinvigorating education in America's founding principles and history. I do this work as a volunteer, as a concerned citizen, and so it is a special honor to be here today to testify. Thank you. At the Jack Miller Center, we do not have a set of prescriptive policies to enact, let alone a model curriculum to suggest. Rather, I'm here to provide a descriptive vision of the democratic heritage we must pass to each generation of Americans. JMC stands neither on the right nor the left, but on the side of optimism about America's future and faith in its fundamental principles. We believe that the ideals of the American founding are the pre-partisan inheritance of every citizen, and we therefore believe that every citizen deserves an education in these principles. Anyone who has lived this decade can tell you our nation has had some hard days. During another bitter election season, civil dialogue was all but absent. From the news media to social media, even at our holiday tables, our current civic culture sees, not seeks, common ground. Especially troubling was a November 4th Wall Street Journal report that civics teachers were steering clear of the election or really any current political issue in their classrooms. Political campaigns and national issues are crucial opportunities for teachers to engage students in the democratic process and teach them to become thoughtful citizens. Yes, there are teachers who have taken it upon themselves to teach their personal politics, but many more teachers, I believe, understand their critical role and simply lack the confidence to lead their students in political discussions. They are provided with limited educational resources and limited content-based career development while having to cope with a volatile political climate and a culture that devalues what Americans hold in common. We need to work together to find solutions for this crisis of confidence. We need to support civics teachers in any way we can so they can teach students to grow into their roles as young citizens who take responsibility for self-government. I come with hopeful news today. Last month, JMC held its third National Summit on Civic Education. Our country is experiencing a renaissance of interest in civic education, and none too soon. At colleges across the country, traditional fields of liberal education, from history and political thought to philosophy and literature, have been disappearing. The move away from core knowledge has trickled down to the K-12 classroom. For 20 years, JMC has worked to fill this gap by supporting scholars devoted to teaching America's founding principles in history. Our programs also aim to empower K-12 teachers with a deep understanding of core texts, great debates, and great moments in our history. We work with the top professors in our network of 1,200 scholars to provide rigorous professional development and innovative classroom models that give teachers the knowledge and confidence they need. Across the country, we've found partners who share our reverence for the American political tradition. We have witnessed, for example, a rising desire to reincorporate civics into college university curricula, expressed in new programs at Stanford, Purdue, and Johns Hopkins, to name a few. And after decades of underfunding, a number of state legislatures are now stepping up to provide support for interdisciplinary departments at public universities dedicated to the kind of education and staffed by leading political scientists, historians, economists, and other scholars that you heard about today from Jed Atkins. Another benefit of this emerging movement for civics in higher education is advanced civic education for teachers. Arizona State University and Utah Valley University, the latter in partnership with UVU's School of Education, have introduced innovative graduate programs for civics and history teachers to advance their knowledge of the subjects they teach. The beating heart of American civic education will always be at the K-12 level. We need to redouble our efforts to teach students about all of America's history, the good and the bad. The occasion of America's 250th birthday presents an opportunity for this civic education renewal. We believe that the civics curiosity that characterized our bicentennial can again take hold in 2026, and we certainly need to make the most of that opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Weiser. Well done. Well done. Under the committee rule 9, we will now question witnesses under the 5-minute rule. I will begin first and will recognize myself for 5 minutes, put the clock on me. So I've made some bold statements. I've said critical race theory is here. It's taken over our schools. I need some backup. Mr. Rowe, is it true that critical race theory is here in American schools? Put your mic. You say yes. Is it yes?
Yes.
Should we be worried about it?
Unfortunately, the answer to your question is yes.
Okay, Mr. Dr. Atkins, is it here? Am I just making this up? Is the chairman crazy, or is it really here?
Well, this is not my. Yeah, critical race theory in high school is not my area of expertise, so I will yield to Dr. Rowe on this one.
Very good. We're not teaching critical thought, though. That is your expertise. And we could do better teaching kids how to think.
Yeah, certainly, students come in to college, as I said before, not prepared to have conversations across difference. And the good news is the desire for them to have conversation across difference is very high, but their own assessment of their preparedness is very low.
10-4. Mr. Weiser, I know you're specializing in civics, and I appreciate your voice. I can tell there's great excitement and enthusiasm, and you sense, you must have read Mr. Roan's book about a sense of urgency to get it done. Civics, is there a problem with civics being taught in American schools right now? Turn that mic on, Mr. Weiser.
Certainly there's a gap. And it cannot be filled with alternative theories about how we came to be. We have something in common. We have to share that. And in so doing, we build citizens, whole citizens, self-reliant citizens.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Rowe, you mentioned that the Woodson Center curriculum offers lessons on Black excellence in the face of unimaginable diversity. How does the curriculum strike the balance between being honest about America's history without demonizing America?
Good question. And just on your question earlier about critical race theory, it's important to recognize some of its original constructionists, they define critical race theory. It embraces incrementalism. Unlike traditional civil rights, critical race theory questions the very foundations of the liberal order, including equality theory, legal reasoning, Enlightenment rationalism, and neutral principles of constitutional law. This is exactly not the type of theory we need taught in our schools, nor the practices such as privilege walks or professional development, which separates teachers by race and other destructive actions. In terms of the Woodson Center curriculum, this concept of teaching American history, warts and all. Let me give you one example from the free units we've created. The Tulsa Massacre is often a topic that's controversial in how it's taught. Some people say it's not taught at all, or it's sanitized. In our curriculum, the first lesson within the Tulsa Massacre is all about how was it that during Jim Crow segregation, that these black entrepreneurs raise capital, build wealth, create Black Wall Street. If that kind of success could have been achieved when racism was essentially enshrined into law through Jim Crow segregation, why can't that same level of success be achieved today? So that's the first lesson. The second lesson then talks about the Tulsa Massacre in all of its horror, not sugar-coated at all. You just be very honest about what occurred. But then the final lesson is about the rebuilding of Tulsa. And our sense is that's the approach through the entire curriculum. Tell the entire story. Have confidence that American history, rightly told in a comprehensive fashion, will inspire the very reverence I think we all seek.
Thank you. Dr. Atkins, you touched briefly on what you're doing. You're teaching kids to think and having a space where there can be a dialogue of diversity. Tell us how you have set UNC Chapel Hill on fire and the whole nation now is watching. What's going on there?
Well, that's a big question. But essentially what we're doing is inviting students in to have conversations across difference, giving the capacity in the classroom and outside of the classroom. And fundamental to this is having, again, understanding the American political tradition. So they're reading the founding documents, they're reading the Declaration, the Federalists, Anti-Federalists, the Gettysburg Address, the Emancipation Proclamation, letter from the Birmingham jail, and then also being exposed to and participating in the vigorous debates of liberty and equality.
Creating diversity of thought. Thank you very much. I know we'll hear more with other questions. I have to call the gavel on myself because my time has expired. I now recognize Ranking Member Bonamici. You are recognized 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Bean, and thank you to the witnesses for your testimony. Very much appreciated it. I want to reiterate that the federal government does not and should not dictate curriculum. And you're using the term critical race theory without really defining it. And as you likely know, is a legal theory posited by Derek Bell, who happened to be the dean of my law school, but is not a K-12 issue. I have to say, your own witnesses, Mr. Chairman, support an accurate teaching of history, and I don't think any of us debate that students should be taught an accurate rendering of history. I support a public school system where every student has access to a well-rounded education that includes civics and the arts and the humanities. In fact, Dr. Atkins, you make a very good case for liberal arts education at the university level, and it's a conversation I hope to have someday in the Higher Education Subcommittee. I don't think you will find a disagreement about that, but you mentioned also the lack of confidence in higher education. I've sat in this committee for several years and heard numerous times my colleagues on the other side of the aisle bash higher education. And I recall several years ago a senator who was once running for president saying we don't need any more philosophy majors, we need more welders. I happen to think we need both. Does anybody disagree that we need both philosophy majors and welders? Nobody's raising their hand there?
I like welders that study philosophy.
Perfect. But this is supposed to be a hearing about K-12 curriculum, but we are not a school board. And instead of discussing the details of what schools are teaching, we should focus on who has access to high-quality learning environments. And that's something that does, in fact, fall under the purview of the federal government. Our focus should be on equity of opportunity, and it's impossible to achieve educational equity when school segregation remains pervasive. Many more students attend schools in high-poverty districts than low-poverty districts, yet high-poverty districts spend about $1 billion less on capital construction. So, Mr. Kennedy, how does the investment gap exacerbate segregation, and why is it important for Congress to include funding for school infrastructure in its year-end funding package, as well as the next fiscal year budget to make long-term investments in new school construction?
Well, thank you for the question. Yeah, the inequity in our school system is really reflected in the facilities that the students are attending. That, as you mentioned, high poverty schools are not in a position to do the kind of financing that other schools can do. The vast majority of funding for school facilities comes from the local level. The State of Our Schools report indicated it was about 77% local, which is mostly based on property taxes, 22% state, and the federal government at 1%. So the inequity in our educational system is reflected throughout in every aspect of education, and it sends a bad message to students that we send them to go to schools that are falling apart.
And on the contrary, think about the message it sends for students to go into a school building that's fully equipped and healthy. In the district I happen to represent, I have some brand new school buildings in wealthier districts, and I have some really old buildings that are in need of desperate repair, particularly in the more rural areas. So when you think about investments in school infrastructure, it sends a message to low-income students that we don't care about their communities, and to if they're in rundown buildings or lack the resources. What message does it send to parents? What message does it send to the community? And how does having a dilapidated and outdated school building affect the surrounding community as well as the students who go to school there?
So I guess another aspect of that is that the fact that going to school is mandatory. So we're requiring students to spend 6 to 8 hours a day, and sometimes in buildings that are safe and unhealthy. So that, as I said, it sends a bad message to them that we don't think their education is important, that we don't think they're important, that their community hasn't invested in them.
And when a new school building is built or a building is renovated, what does it do to the surrounding community and the property values?
It helps. And it also creates jobs, good paying jobs that are career sustaining jobs. It creates other jobs in the community for suppliers and others who participate in that. It reflects throughout. Investment in infrastructure is an investment that creates growth, and so pays for itself to some extent.
I appreciate that, and I'm just about out of time, but I want to reiterate to my colleagues, this is something we can and should be doing. We want every student to be learning in a building that is safe and clean, with safe drinking water and the technological advancements that they deserve. So I would like to see that investment made, and I urge my colleagues to continue the conversation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. Let's go to the great state of Pennsylvania. Mr. Thompson, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman, thank you so much. I know this hearing, thank you to all our witnesses for being here. I know this hearing is not about infrastructure, but I will say we don't need new legislation when it comes to infrastructure, being a recovering school board member. But what we need are some corrections in terms of Congress at some point meeting its obligation of 40% funding for special education. That was the promise was made. When IDEA was enacted into law, we're in the teens, we're nowhere close, and quite frankly, I'll put a plug in for my ACE Act, All Children Are Equal, when it comes to Title I funding. Because many of the schools you're talking about maybe would have some additional, quite frankly, financial assets to be able to invest more in their schools. So we don't need more bureaucracy. I think there's some things that we need to correct. Thank you again for the witnesses. Mr. Weiser, thank you for your leadership of the center in in Philadelphia area. Incredible organization. I'm looking forward to actually working more with you on this. In your testimony, I was particularly struck by your statement that we have a crisis of knowledge in the country right now when it comes to civics education, and unfortunately I agree. As you noted, I believe that there's no time better than the present to address this crisis given the 250th celebration of our nation's founding coming up in less than 2 years. I've often said that education is a pathway to opportunity, and I believe there's no better occasion to help promote our nation's history, values, and traditions than our 250th birthday. So, Mr. Weiser, how do you think we can use this upcoming celebration to inspire the next generation of civic leaders?
Well, it's an interesting question. Thank you for it, Mr. Thompson. The bicentennial in 1976 triggered an interest in civics, recreations, history novels became bestsellers, made the careers of people like David McCullough. We think that same interest can be kindled in 2026. We've worked closely at the Jack Miller Center with Victoria Hughes, whom you may know, who is the co-chair for civics education for America 250. I think that's also a start, because we'll have a second 250th celebration coming up some years after, on the 250th founding of the Constitution itself. And so this runway, if you will, creates a real opportunity to rekindle interest and activity.
Yeah, I think it's an exciting opportunity. Absolutely. As we've heard in your testimony, part of the issue is a crisis of confidence in the classroom. Unfortunately, too often these days, facts are being needlessly politicized. For example, I think everyone can agree that all voting age adults in this country should be able to name the 3 branches of government. However, a 2023 survey from the Annenberg Public Policy Center found that only 17% of all Americans could not even name one branch of government. This is a failure in education, and we must do better in K through 12 level educating the next generation. And each year I'm proud to organize and participate in an event called Government Outreach back in my district. I use local universities. I represent a third of the landmass of Pennsylvania, so we spread these 3 things out for accessibility. And the event is for high school students throughout the Northwest and Central Pennsylvania, an opportunity to get involved in government, ask questions, and discuss current issues with a variety of speakers from different backgrounds. And over the years, I've found that what makes events like these so successful is that high school students have rarely had the opportunity to interact with their government at any level or ask meaningful questions of their elected officials. And trust me, these kids are prepared when they show up for government outreach days. I get my hardest questions from them. So Mr. Weiser, given your work at the Jack Miller Center, how can we as a nation make government and civics more personal for our nation's youth to help educate them about our history, civil discourse, and our nation's values?
Thank you for the question. We can talk about buildings and curricula and all the rest, and those are important elements, obviously, in an educational system. But they're 2 intangibles. One is curiosity. We talked about that before. The other is confidence. Are we arming our teachers with what they need to do a really good job of teaching our culture, of teaching our history, of teaching our way of doing governmental business? I mean, these are things that, when we boil it all down, we all have. And for some to get it, and for others to not get it, is one of the cruelest forms of inequity that we can possibly engineer. And so,
Mr. Weiser, thank you so much. I regret the time's expired. The gentleman's time's expired. Thank you, though. We're going to hopefully get a chance to finish your thought in just a second. But first, let's go to the great state of Connecticut, where Representative Hayes is recognized for questions.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm feverishly writing because my whole line of questioning is changing because I realize I don't really have any questions because I'm not really sure what the outcome or the expected outcome of this hearing is right now. The title of this hearing is Back to Basics, America's Founding, Civics, and Self-Government in K-12 Curricula. However, as my colleague, Representative Bonamici, stated, the federal government has no role in curriculum. So I'm not really sure what it is we're supposed to gauge from this panel, and as I've listened to the witnesses, that information has become less and less clear. I do agree with Chairman Thompson over there about the need to fully fund IDEA and special education. That would be a tremendous use of our time, and if this committee could actually achieve that, I think that we will have done some good work. I've heard reference to critical race theory by several people on this committee. I can tell you I was a public school teacher, history teacher for 15 years. All of my training, my undergraduate degree, my master's, my postgraduate degree were all in education, and we never had any reference to critical race theory. I never had any professional development that separated me by race and taught this because it is just not taught or discussed at the K-12 level. So not really sure why it's a part of this hearing today. It is a legal theory taught in law school, and if that needs to be said, once again, I'll say that. I have sat on curriculum committees. I have been a part of curriculum committees. I have led curriculum committees. I don't know that everyone in this room can say that, and I can say on those committees, we've had regional school district leaders, local educators, teachers, parents, and even students, and never once did we solicit or ask for the input of federal legislators or lawmakers. So again, this just doesn't make sense. In the state of Connecticut, the people decided by a vote at the state legislature that we would teach African American and Puerto Rican studies. So that is taught in the state of Connecticut, decided by the people of Connecticut, and the curriculums are developed locally. I do agree with Mr. Rowe when you were talking about teaching about the Tulsa race riots, because I also taught African American history, and I agree that we have to examine the successes that the people in that community had, but we cannot do that while ignoring the conditions that made that race riot happen. It is teaching students all of the perspectives, giving them all of the information, and then teaching them how to critically analyze, how to evaluate primary and secondary sources, how to determine bias, all of those things, but not to shield or sugarcoat, to use your word, areas that are in history. I've never seen, actually federal law prohibits the federal government from exercising control over local curriculums. In Section 438 of the General Education Provisions Act, it states that the federal government, and I quote, cannot exercise any direction, supervision, or control over curriculum, program, instruction, administration, or personnel of any educational institution, schools, or school systems, or over the selection of library resources, textbooks, or other printed or published instructional materials by any educational institution or school system, end quote. The federal government has no role in local curriculum. In my state, once again, state of Connecticut, the state decides the framework, which is general standards, like I said, evaluating sources, determining biases, human interaction, geographical movements, those really large overarching themes, but the way that is taught is decided at the local level, not in Congress, not here. So while we can pretend and ignore that very basic fact, I'm going to state it over and over again. This is a solution looking for a problem, and it is not our problem to solve. We can work on funding education. We can work on the way that the federal government interacts with state school districts, but deciding local curriculum is not our job. And anyone who has any background and knowledge on educators, on education, on what educators actually do in the classroom, on the people who choose this profession as a life choice and are truly invested in improving outcomes for students and making them college and career ready, will understand that this is not where that takes place. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Let's go to the great state of Utah, where Mr. Owens is recognized for questions.
First of all, thank you so much. I appreciate Chairman Bean, your open statement. Appreciate the innovators that sit in front of us. We have one promise that began from the very beginning of our nation. Opportunity for life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And that begins with education. Every child, no matter what zip code they live in, what color they have, what the background, deserves life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Let me tell you why that's not happening. In some of the highest per student districts and states in our country. State of California, $22,000 per child. State of California, 75% of the black boys in the state of California cannot read, write, and think. Baltimore, $21,000 per student. Baltimore, 23 schools with zero proficiency in math. So do we owe our kids an opportunity to think? How about choice, which the other side seems to have a real problem with that one. Choice works because parents have a chance to see failing schools, failing curriculums, and say, you know what? I do see critical race theory, and I want out of this one. So for those who don't believe critical race theory is prevalent, you need to wake up, my friends. There's a reason why our country's heading the direction we're going in right now. And we're going to change that. We're going to put, moving forward, innovators who understand the power of our country is to make sure our kids can think. That's our national security. That's a national security issue if there's ever been one. And we're going to make sure our kids moving forward, thank goodness for the trifecta. Our kids can think, be proud of who they are, be sought after around the world. We don't have to bring in smart people from China and India, but we can build them right here in our country. So we're going to do that. I want to thank you guys again and parents trust teachers to provide objective and correct. What was said earlier, what are we taught? Confidence, and why, Mr. Weiser, I'm going to ask you, confidence and curiosity. Thank you for that. That's what we need. We're going to get it back. Mr. Rowe, you point to the rise of divisive ideologies like critical race theory and its impact on education. In your view, how should lawmakers and educators address the challenge of creating a curriculum that fosters an understanding of American history while avoiding the narrative that divides students along racial and ideological lines?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I know that it's just question, what is the role of the federal government? I think one of the benefits of this hearing is highlighting those examples of curricula that does reflect American founding principles, that it reflects the equality of opportunity, the ideas that undergird America. When we launched our Woodson Center curriculum, we honestly had no idea that we would now have teachers, thousands of teachers in all 50 states downloading this curriculum more than 200,000 times, specifically because they were looking for curricula that was not being taught in their current schools. It was either restrictive or embedded principles of critical race theory. So I think this idea that it's not happening is missing what's actually relevant in schools. And let me just close with, you just raised I think a crucial point that is intertwined with improved civic education, and that's the concept of school choice. We launched our school in the Bronx in a school district in which only 7% of kids graduate from high school ready for college, right? That means 93% of students started ninth grade and either dropped out over the course of 4 years, or they did earn their high school diploma, but still could not do math nor reading without remediation if they were to go to school. And yet in New York City, there's a cap on charter schools. If you had the idea to create a great school, you couldn't do it. So if you were, imagine you're a 22-year-old mom in that district and you're sentenced to send your kid to a school that is teaching content that you don't believe in, yet you are restricted to send your kid even to a beautiful school. I built an 85,000 square foot building in the heart of the South Bronx. I'm a big believer in infrastructure, but if the parent doesn't have the right, the ability to send their kid to that school, what have we done?
Thank you, and I'm so sorry we're out of time, Ms. Weiser. I was going to thank you for your highlight of UVU, doing some great things in Utah, and I really want to work with you as close as I can, all of you, because we need to make sure we're putting this as a priority. We'll get that done as we innovate moving forward. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Mr. Owens. Let's go to the great state of California. Mr. DeSalinay, you're recognized. Welcome.
those years in French class worked. Your pronunciation gets better and better all the time, Mr. Green. Thank you. Just an observation following the last conversation. One of the things in civic engagement in schools, and just your comments about parents feeling accessible, in the last 15 years, we've hardened schools that we were spending money on making them community-based schools, particularly in places like the Bronx and Harlem and where I live in the Bay Area, and it was working. Families, particularly single parent families, felt like they could take their kids to school, go to after-school programs, and the physical infrastructure was changing in California and around the country, especially in urban areas like that. And we knew that it worked, that after-school programs worked when parents felt like they could go there and it was a community center. One of the things that's so discouraging in the last 10 years in particular is we've had to harden all those schools. I mean, we had to because of violence in schools, about the access to guns in this country. So the cause and effect on citizenship, I think it's just so remarkable to sit here and listen to citizenship and the basic principle of schools being community centers in this country where people and parents and kids can go and interact. And we know that when parents are engaged with their kids physically and emotionally and in disadvantaged communities where they can go and feel safe there. And what we've done, because we allow for the proliferation of weapons in this country, is just astounding to me on citizenship. Just my 2 cents worth listening to this. Mr. Kennedy, it's great to see you, looking very distinguished. I know that Mr. Scott and I didn't give you any of those gray hairs that you have, but they look distinguished. I want to ask you about the Governmental Accountability Office, and 2/3 of school districts in the U.S. have schools with physical barriers that limit access for kids with disabilities and maybe out of compliance with the Americans with Disability Act. School districts cited finding constraints as a challenge to bringing their facilities into compliance. So in the context of my earlier conversations and just how we've had to reprioritize for affected communities, what do you have comments about that kind of money and disadvantages civic engagement from at-risk kids and kids with disabilities?
Thanks for the question. Good to see you again. The gray hair does come whether you want it or not. I think because we have schools that are 50 years old, they don't reflect modern policies. So they were built before we had the Americans with Disabilities Act. They were built before we had standards to withstand severe weather. So it's just another example of how important it is to have updated facilities that can address all those modern needs.
I wanted to ask you about the federal assistance from the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act and the requirement of 2009 to comply with Davis-Bacon provisions to make sure in my community that makes sure that local highly trained people go in and actually do the work. That as a former small business owner, you could physically see the effect of that as multiplied into the community. So could you speak to the importance of having Davis-Bacon provisions in this, and in terms of civic engagement, that those folks go out and they work on the schools, their kids often go to those schools, but they get livable wages in high-cost areas like the ones I represent in the Bay Area.
So Davis-Bacon was enacted to protect local standards, and part of it was because local workers have pride in the work they're doing and care about what they're giving to the community. Davis-Bacon was enacted back in the 1930s, and the sponsors were John Davis, a Republican senator from Pennsylvania, and Robert Bacon, a Republican congressman from New York. It was signed into law by Herbert Hoover. And those members who sponsored the original law did it because they wanted to protect local standards. It's important to have good wages and benefits to help your community.
And that Hoover, you know, he's a socialist from the Bay Area, or at least for 4 years. Well, I want to thank you for those comments. I do really want to thank the chair and chair of the full committee and the ranking members. I think this is a good subject. civic engagement and education at the federal level, although our limits around curriculum that's been stated, but still the importance of our engagement in it. It clearly is needed on a bipartisan level, and hopefully future hearings will be more like that. Nice to see you, Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you very much. Let's go to the great state of Michigan, where Mr. Wahlberg is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for allowing me to wave on to the committee. And thanks to our chairman of the full committee for this new AV system. It's been a long time coming, but we're enjoying it today. I thank the committee for holding this important, and I believe it is an important hearing today, that we ought to be considering, because 9% of federal funding goes to K-12 schools. But 90% of our bureaucracy, regulatory environment goes to our K-12 schools. So we're having an impact. Our children's future is built on the education foundation they receive in their elementary and secondary school. Rightfully so. Education is not listed anywhere in our federal Constitution. And federal government should not dictate curriculum in schools. I'll say that very clearly. It is therefore the critical role of the state and local leaders to rigorously vet all curriculum in their schools. And parents have a right to know what their students are being taught, so they can be partners in their child's education and ensure their child is in the best setting for them to thrive, even if it's a charter school. We have known for years that despite historic investments in education, buildings and other things, schools failing, our next generation are prevalent. In Chicago, my hometown, 2 out of 3 students in 3rd through 8th grade cannot read proficiently. And when compared to other highly developed countries, the U.S. ranks 26th in math. The pandemic highlighted these deficiencies even further. Parents finally had a window into the indoctrination that was taking place, with teachers focusing on CRT that they were indoctrinated in the schools of education from which they gained their degrees, rather than reading, writing, and arithmetic. School staff were more concerned about their own pronouns rather than students understanding how to use a pronoun in a sentence. And perhaps most concerning, school districts and states saying to parents, quote, "You don't have a right to know what's happening to your child in school." This is wholly unacceptable, and why parents across the country have said enough is enough. Mr. Rowe, thank you for your efforts and your examples that it can be done. You mentioned that teaching critical race theory distracts from widespread academic underachievement. Could you elaborate on this a bit more and explain in your view the harm of teaching CRT to students, and again, confirm that there is CRT being taught in our local K-12 schools?
The point that Congressperson Hayes was mentioning was critical race theory as a legal concept. No, you won't hear that in 1st grade, but you will see practices such as learning walks where children are lined up in a horizontal line, and a teacher will say, take 2 steps forward if you're white and take 3 steps backward if you're black. Or there will be different policies around state assessments if there are racial disparities in outcomes, and this ideology that racial disparities must equal racism or structural racism, so therefore let's eliminate objective assessments and standards. Those are the specific practices undergirded by the ideology driving critical race theory. So those things are very, very prevalent, and we all want to eliminate those kinds of practices, but then I come back to this point of choice. If you're a 22-year-old mom who has a 5-year-old kid and you want the best for your child, you don't have time to wait for all these magical improvements to occur. You want the ability to send your kid to a great school today. And so this conference, I think, is very, very important, and it has to be intertwined with the importance of school choice.
Thank you, Mr. Rowe. Dr. Atkins, congratulations on your show of success as well. I know you've spoken a lot about the role that social media plays in coarsening our civil discourse. How have you seen social media use use harm young people, especially when it comes to fostering values key to a self-governing society, such as civil dialogue and mutual understanding. I just finished reading The Anxious Generation. I agree with most all of what I read in there, and I'm shocked with what I've seen. But could you respond?
Sure. Well, social media incentivizes people often to think in terms of in-groups and out-groups, and often in binaries. There's like and dislike buttons, and there's no maybe-like buttons. Civil discourse is a human work that requires face-to-face interaction and and trust that's acquired in formal and informal settings. And that's one reason why we at Carolina are setting up a civil discourse community so that students can have those late-night dorm conversations. Getting to know one another face-to-face.
Thank you. My time has expired.
Thank you very much. Let's go to the great state of Virginia. Mr. Good, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, the most historical state of all, the great state of Virginia. Mr. Rowe and our other witnesses, thanks for being with us here today. We continue to hear stories of how and where CRT has been incorporated into government school curriculums, blaming everything on race, looking at everything through a racial lens, determined to divide students and individuals based on race, designating victims and oppressors based on race, dishonestly presenting our nation's founding and our history, denying the progress that's been made in this country. For example, the election of a black president, the election of a black vice president, our current black House minority leader, and yet somehow Democrats repeat the lie that CRT is not in our K-12 schools. Of course, we don't have in K-12 schools a class called CRT, but can you speak once again to how this harmful dogma, this harmful ideology permeates the classrooms and the curriculums in our government schools?
Yeah, I did give a few examples, but let me also say we are so fixated on race. According to the nation's report card, the National Assessment for Educational Progress, there has never been a year in which a majority of white students are reading at grade level, at 4th grade, 8th grade, and 12th grade. So if we were to close this racial achievement gap that we often talk about between black and white students, all we will have achieved is achieving universal mediocrity. And so this obsession with critical race theory, we're spending so much time talking about issues of race when we have a widespread literacy crisis. It's a huge distraction. And it is much more likely that the reasons all kids across race are not reading at grade level is because we don't have focus on things like the science of reading, accurate access to high quality curricula that is very comprehensive and accurate. That's what we should be spending our time on versus the practices associated with critical race theory that often end up perpetuating the very division that it is asserting to address.
Widespread mediocrity does seem to be the goal of some, and you can see what the priorities are by what we fund. In Virginia, there's many examples of racist CRT ideology in our government schools. In Albemarle County, in the Charlottesville area, in my district, parents actually sued the government schools over curriculum infested with CRT because they understood that teaching children to treat people differently based on race is not only wrong, but it's illegal. That's why I sponsored a bill, by the way, Defending Students' Civil Rights Act, to clarify that it's a violation of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to teach critical race theory in schools that receive government funding. And with all of these examples, it's even worse when it's the federal government that's funding it. And we got numerous examples of that. Schools use their COVID-19 funding to promote these CRT ideas under a guise of managing the problems, or managing the pandemic, I should say. Virginia's Board of Education reported that COVID-19 funds were used to support Virginia's, quote, roadmap to equity, end quote. The Virginia plan promises to advance racial equity and hold a commitment to the principles of anti-racism. Of course, the Biden administration has made racial ideology a budget priority, requesting $100 million in new spending recently to support racial and socioeconomic diversity in schools, calling for $468 million for a community schools program that embeds culturally relevant ideology and restorative justice practices. And then the Parents Defending Education's online indoctrination map shows hundreds of examples of government schools promoting CRT curriculum and policies that directly impact students. How widespread is this in your studies, in your experience? How widespread is this in our nation's government schools?
I would say it's relatively widespread. When you use the term racial equity, that is a euphemism for equal outcomes by racial group. And so, for example, any racial disparity then becomes the goal is to close that gap. So again, I share that there has never been a majority of white students reading at grade level. So so achieving racial outcomes by group, again, it's this idea of universal mediocrity, the idea of eliminating objective assessments at the state level. There are many states now that are eliminating, even in New York State, we're about to eliminate the New York State regents, which for years has been the gold standard for how a student would demonstrate that they actually know reading and math sufficiently to graduate. But those objective assessments are being eliminated across the country. It's a real tragedy because now they're being replaced with amorphous mechanisms by which students demonstrate that they're graduating from high school ready for college.
Thank you, Mr. Rowe. Thank you, all of our witnesses, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Let's stay with the great Commonwealth of Virginia and recognize the ranking member on the Committee of Education and Workforce. Mr. Scott, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've heard a lot about critical race theory, and it is in fact an elective taught in some law schools. So you need a high school diploma, 4 years of college, probably a year of law school as a prerequisite to even take the course. Students K through 12 obviously don't have that background, and calling every mention of race CRT is absurd. And furthermore, as it's been frequently mentioned on this side, the curriculum is not directed by the federal government. So if there is a decision to teach CRT and include CRT in the curriculum, the federal government would have no role in that decision under present education policy. Now, maybe we should revisit that policy and have the federal government involved in curriculum. So I'd ask Mr. Rowe, should the federal government direct how the Tulsa race riot ought to be taught?
That's a great question. The answer is no. What I think is...
Okay, well, anybody on the panel think that the federal government ought to inject itself on local decisions on curriculum, whether you agree with what is in the curriculum or not? Anybody want the federal government in that? Okay.
Well, again, I would just offer up that I think it's very helpful. Again, as we've learned from the Woodson Center curriculum, there are hundreds of thousands of teachers begging for high-quality curricular resources because they feel what they're teaching is not representative. So when we have more than 200,000 downloads by teachers in all 50 states, that does suggest that there is a role for exemplars of high-quality curriculum.
We're federal government, and the question was whether or not the federal government ought to inject itself in the curriculum, and the unanimous response I heard was no, we should not involve ourselves in the curriculum. And so, Mr. Kennedy, welcome back to the committee. You've been here many times, and you've outlined the problem of school infrastructure and how the problem is worse because we fund local education primarily with the real estate tax, guaranteeing that low-income areas will have a harder time funding education than wealthier areas. How do low-income communities pay for schools now?
Primarily through local property tax.
And if they don't have much to deal with, that's why schools are 47 years old on average, and some a lot older than that. They just don't build schools.
They postpone things, they patch things up, they try to make do.
And so the problem that you've outlined will persist until the federal government steps up and helps.
It needs to be a partnership, federal government, states, and locals.
Let me ask in the final minute or two, ask the panel what we should be focused on to improve academic achievement, that is to eliminate achievement gaps, improve graduation rates, and the problems that the gentleman from Utah outlined where some schools just are simply not getting the job done. What should we be focusing on?
Well, I would suggest ensuring that low-income families have the same privileges that middle and upper-class families have, which is the power of choice, which is the ability to move to the suburbs, to send their child to a private school or religious school or to the school that they believe is best for their child. And yet, most low-income folks in the United States live in communities in which they don't have that choice. So one of the first things we could do is make it so that universal school choice is the first element towards giving people a shot that want to give their kid the best chance at an education.
Well, choice doesn't improve the schools. Does anybody else have a way to actually improve the academic achievement?
Well, studies do show that better facilities that are safe and healthy and conducive to learning improve academic achievement.
Thank you. And what else we should be focusing on to improve academic achievement?
I think one thing that's very important is providing our future teachers with the capacities to have conversations across difference, to teach those in their classrooms, and to provide civic knowledge such that our students, the majority of our students recognize that the legislative branch has the power to declare war, whereas right now only 1/3 of high school students or incoming college students recognize that.
So improve teacher preparation. Anybody else? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Scott, thank you very much. Let's go to the great state of North Carolina, where the chair of the Education and Workforce Committee is standing by, and she is recognized for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this has been a great hearing, and I appreciate all of the witnesses for being here. And I agree that the federal government should not dictate curriculum. I think that's both sides of the aisle believe in that. And I will say that my understanding from all the research is that choice does improve achievement. We have lots of data, lots of information to prove that. So yes, Mr. Scott asked, what can we do to achieve, to improve achievement? And I think, Mr. Rowe, your answer was exactly right. I want to really thank you for pointing out the benefit of this hearing too, and giving us a new term to think about, universal mediocrity. You mentioned the Vertex Partnership Academy is organized around the 4 cardinal virtues of courage, justice, temperance, and wisdom. And many of our charter schools are organized around principles and like that. How do you incorporate those values in your school's curriculum?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, any school that has kids, 8 to 10 hours a day, you are in the moral formation business. It's just that some school leaders take that role intentionally, and others it's kind of happenstance. For us, we anchored our school around these 4 cardinal virtues because they are the root virtues upon which all other standards of moral excellence depend. And for each virtue, courage, justice, temperance, or wisdom, there's what we call an I statement. So courage is I reject victimhood and boldly persevere, even in times of uncertainty and struggle. So when our students are standing up in their blazers and their ties, looking very strong, saying those words, you can feel this power in unison, that they will reject this idea that they are just a victim of circumstance. Or temperance is I lead my life with self-discipline because I am responsible for my learning and my behavior. It's through these mechanisms in our behavior systems, our reward systems, our curriculum is organized around these 4 cardinal virtues. We find it very powerful as a vehicle by which our students develop the sense of agency, that they can lead self-determined lives of meaning and purpose.
Thank you for those examples. Dr. Atkins, thank you very much for coming and bringing your family. I want to commend William and Caroline for being wonderful people in the audience tonight and today in particular. One of my concerns about post-secondary education is how intolerant much of the sector is, that there's no room for free speech or free exchange of ideas. Much of campus discussion, especially around political issues, is entirely one-sided. That's why I think your work's so important. You touched on this briefly in your testimony, but from your perspective as a dean and educator, what's the worst consequences of a campus culture that shuts down free speech? And remember, I've got one more question to ask of Mr. Weiser.
Well, thank you for the invitation and for your hospitality. As I discussed in my written testimony, central to the founding vision of UNC and Trustee McCorkle was the freedom of speech that's essential for the search for truth. And that can invite both students and faculty with diverse backgrounds and perspectives into that. And as a Tar Heel, I may be biased, but I tend to agree with Trustee McCorkle. The search for truth is foundational to the mission of a public university like the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And when the free exchange of ideas is hindered, that mission is in jeopardy. The mission of the university itself is at stake when we fail to provide space for the free exchange of ideas, and a covenant that we have with the people of our state is liable to be broken.
Thank you very much. And, you know, for those of us who are from Carolina, we call it the university. Mr. Weiser, you mentioned in your testimony that many teachers have simply never been educated in how to lead discussions about current events, political debates, or our system of government. In your view, why have teachers been prepared so poorly, or often not at all, to lead these kinds of discussions?
Well, what we are told repeatedly, and thank you for your leadership, Madam Chair. Thank you. What we've been told repeatedly is that in schools of education, they receive pedagogy, but very little content. And they are hungry for content. We have no difficulty drawing a crowd when we hold a seminar, a program with a senior scholar and high school or grade school teachers. They want it. They want it. They know they lack it. They know they need it, and they want it.
And we also know from research that when we provide people who have strong content backgrounds but have never gone to a school of education, because of their strong backgrounds in content, they make excellent teachers often. Not always, but often. So you are verifying, again, what we know about the need for content. So thank you very much for doing that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for going over time a little bit, but I do think this has been an important hearing to expose to the American people the benefits of these programs that are being displayed here today. Many, many more out there, and we need to highlight those when we can. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Chairman Fox. What a great meeting we have had. We're nearing the end, and thank everybody. Let's go for closing statements. Ranking Member Bonamici, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for your time, your insights, your expertise today. It's been a very interesting discussion, especially as a longtime supporter of civics education, but it's clear that we should focus on something we have the power to legislate, like school infrastructure, like supporting low-income students and students with disabilities, and supporting schools in rural communities. I agree with my colleague, Representative Hayes, who was agreeing with Representative Thompson that we should fully fund IDEA. We should fund Title I. And Mr. Rowe, you mentioned the need for professional development. Well, we have professional development. Let's fund Title II of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. So there's been here too much discussion about curriculum, which is something the federal government, again, does not and should not dictate, and we all agree on that. I also call on my colleagues to stop highlighting politicized words like woke and CRT, particularly when they're not defined. We all agree that students should learn an accurate telling of history. So let's focus on an issue where we can and should take real action, like making our schools safe, modern, and conducive to learning. The Rebuild America's Schools Act is just one of many examples that offer a tangible solution to a real problem. It's an opportunity to invest in repairing and modernizing school facilities, particularly in underserved communities, creating jobs, improving conditions for students and educators. And this is not just about fixing broken infrastructure. It's about giving every child the opportunity to succeed in an environment that fosters learning. I want to note that there was a comment made by the gentleman from Utah about the Baltimore City schools, that students lack proficiency. I want to mention that it was national news a few years ago that multiple Baltimore City schools had to close because they lacked heat. I would like to enter into the record 2 articles, one that the Baltimore City schools closed because of a lack of heat, and another that the Baltimore City schools had to close because of a lack of air conditioning.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's extremely difficult for students to thrive in schools with poor ventilation, outdated technology, dangerous physical conditions, and we can't expect that teachers will be able to deliver quality education in buildings that are falling apart. It's a matter of equity, safety, and the future of our nation. So I hope today's discussion encourages us to act with the urgency this issue demands. Our schools should be a place where all students can reach their full potential. Thank you again to the witnesses. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Bonamici. I have a closing statement, but first, for the purpose of a point of personal privilege, the chair, very good. Very good. Panelists, I had high expectations for each of you. You heard me as I come in. I said you are an all-star panel. You exceeded expectations, and we had a robust conversation about curriculum. Let the headline project tomorrow morning that Congress agrees. We all agree. Do we agree on anything? We do agree on this, that the federal government shouldn't be in the curriculum business. The Constitution doesn't say it, and we acknowledge that we shouldn't be a part. But let this committee sound the alarm. How about that? We are failing. And to your point, Mr. Rowe, whites or blacks, we're all struggling. Any segment, we're all struggling to read and write. And before you can before you can achieve anything, that's just the basics. And so going back to Mr. Rowe, we can't have a minute to waste as we go forward. So yeah, the alarm is there. We're mediocre in the world, and the world is a dangerous place, and we need bright minds to compete in tomorrow's segment. So it's a wake-up call as we go forward. We don't have the role, but state leaders, maybe this will be replayed on C-SPAN, and there is an educator out there. How do I do it? How do I get some curriculum that can focus back on the basics? Call us. We've got our contact information for our all-star panel, and we can get you teed up on making it happen. Here's the irony. And I know we talked a little bit about school choice. I know that's a subject for another day, but the irony is the programs of which all of you gentlemen are associated with are attracting families and kids who want in on that America has a chance to be great. There's no limit to what they can do, and that's what y'all focus on, teaching everything, the warts and all, Mr. Rowe, to take your words. Ranking Member Bonamici and I just talked about some of the programs. I know there's a, at least in my county, in Nassau County, there's the Constitution Bowl, where high schools put together their all-stars team, and it's sort of like a Jeopardy contest of just questions on the Constitution where learning can be fun. I know you have such a similar program where we can make it happen. Mr. Weiser would agree that civics needs to be a focus as we go forward. So I think we've planted the seed of curiosity. That's another word there too. And if you're curious about how we can do it better, then certainly this is the place to look. As we close, what an honor it has been to serve as the chair of this committee. Ranking Bonamici, we met 2 years ago and said we'll have interesting meetings and discourse, and certainly we have done that. Chair Fox, thank you so much for giving me, you recruited me. How about that? I got recruited to the committee, and lo and behold, to be given this opportunity to lead the discussion has been the honor of my freshman tenure. So thank you all. Staff makes us look good, and I struggled a little bit out of the gate. I still probably do now. They're probably going to tell me, but that's what we want to do. We want to have critical thought and dialogue of how we can do better. So with all that being said, wish everybody a happy holiday season as we go forward. There's lots of work to do, but today, there being no further business before us, this meeting is adjourned. To our panelists, I'd love to get a picture, so don't leave. We're going to come and get a picture. So thank you.